Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am a technology attorney who is passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by... That was a really weak and then interesting drum roll. We got to work on the drum roll. We're going to have drum roll lessons for you. Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, and professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com.
Do you think you want to share our big announcement with our viewers about what happened on Friday night?
Go on ahead.
No, I want to hear you do it.
No, you do it. I don't want to take away from your thunder.
Why not?
Go.
All right. If I embarrass you, it won't be my fault. Well, what we'd like to share with our viewers is in February, Jody and I will be taking a road trip to San Francisco because our version of a fun weekend includes speaking at RSA on a really cool topic, which will be autonomous vehicles and drones, privacy and security versus surveillance. So if you get to RSA in 2022 on February 7th, come see us.
Jody and Justin shows on the road again. Well, to get started, we're so excited for today's guest. We have Elliott, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at Canopy and brings more than a decade of leadership experience in the software and services industries to his role leading Canopy's global revenue operations. He has extensive experience building and leading high-performance marketing, sales, product, and strategy teams. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, we're so excited that you are here to join us. You did not realize that we were going to be chatting all about the fun going to San Francisco, big bridge behind you.
Yeah, that's actually very timely considering my background.
It's my favorite city. I love San Francisco. Anytime you used to answer any of those quizzes and which city you're supposed to live in, I was always San Francisco.
I don't begrudge that. It's a great city.
Indeed. Well, to get us started, we always like to ask a little bit of everyone's career journey and how they got to where they are today in this privacy and security world. So please take us not all the way back, but fill us in.
Yeah, it was circuitous and accidental, like many. So I came in through essentially the eDiscovery door, and that I'm a marketing and kind of product person by trade. And there was a time, this is like in 2008 or so, where I was living in Chicago. I wanted to stay living in Chicago, and all the product and marketing jobs were either in the San Francisco Bay Area or in Seattle, at least with big companies. And there was like a small consulting company that wanted to become a software company, and they needed a head of marketing. So I said, well, if this company like implodes in a year, then I'll just take a job in like Mountain View or something, So I took the job there, leading marketing for an eDiscovery company that became a much bigger eDiscovery company and was pretty successful. The name of it now is like Relativity, and they're like a big player in the eDiscovery space. And essentially, that kicked off a good probably like 15 years in eDiscovery or so, and then privacy and security and data breach response came along when I was kind of, I guess you could say, burned out by helping companies sue each other, because that's kind of what eDiscovery is. But data breach response is like working with data. So a kind of friend put me and the CEO of Canopy together and said, hey, you two should have a conversation. They're doing pretty interesting stuff in the data breach response space. It's somewhat adjacent to eDiscovery, but it's still working with data. And I had some friends that had gotten into privacy, and obviously there's a ton of momentum in the software world there. And so from a software perspective, it was really interesting to me. And from a problems to be solved perspective, it was super interesting. And as soon as I really saw what was happening in data breach, I couldn't not be a part of it. So pretty quickly, me and the CEO of Canopy were like, let's figure this out.
Well, thank you for sharing. eDiscovery is certainly morphing a little bit. I find a lot of people coming from the eDiscovery world into the privacy and security space. You're right. There's definitely some intersection and an overlap. For me, my favorite phrase is it's all about the data, which is underlying for both of those worlds.
Absolutely. And it's one of those spaces that like at 30,000 feet, it looks very similar to eDiscovery, but like a data breach response. But when you get into the weeds, it's actually like incredibly different.
Oh, absolutely. But a fundamental connector is data.
Absolutely.
We all have to know our data.
It interesting. Yeah. And we like live in data all the time, and being able to work with and understand structured and unstructured data is super interesting. And what do you do with it? And how do you get your arms around it? And it's interesting problems that humanity faces these days.
So why don't we dive in a little bit about your current role and talk a little bit about how AI impacts the data breach response process?
Yeah, it's really transformed it in a lot of ways, and it kind of gets at a bit of what I was saying a second ago. Is that data breach response is a really interesting space, in that it was created kind of by fiat by a bunch of very sensible regulations. Like it wasn't a slow a space that developed over 50 years, and slowly there was a tick-tock between like solutions and problem. It was all of a sudden created when both in Europe, North America, Australia, Asia, all of a sudden every country started realizing that there are risks to all the data that's being held, and that the citizens of each of these countries, each of these states, that there's real impact to all of the hacks and incidents and breaches, call it what you will. And so all of a sudden, worldwide, there is the need to do data breach response because of the regulation. So it's created by regulations, and what it didn't. And there was no software space for that at the time. So everyone had to just use best available tech, because the software, the GDPR or CCPA or the state of Virginia, they didn't say, hey, politely wait until a piece of software comes along that specifically solves this problem. It said, hey, right here, right now, notify all the people that are impacted by this. So what people were using is just cobbled together solutions. So like at the time, it was like search terms and regular expressions were what they would use to like say, okay, I have a business email compromise. It's not even that big. Like 20 gigabytes is like pretty typical. That might be a few 100,000 records though. So how do you find out in a few 100,000 records if there's PII in there or not, to notify the people and what names are in there? So in the beginning, that part was like search terms and regular expressions, not super efficient. If you use that on like any data set at all, it's going to tell you like 70% of the data set needs to be looked at, which in reality is way over inclusive. So right from the jump, one of the ways that AI is transforming it is building models to specifically address every element of PII, instead of relying on the kind of search terms and regular expressions that people were showing up with, because that's all they had. So like that's one part of it. And it gets you closer to like the true PII level within a data set, because what you find is if you're using AI and machine learning and algorithms to solve this problem, what you're finding is that the true amount of PII in any given data set, unless you're talking about a healthcare case that's like crazy town and like it's all PII, it's usually like 15%. Like between 10 and 20 is pretty typical. So you like reviewing 85% of the data set that doesn't contain any PII at all is kind of wasteful. And there's money to be made for some folks there, but it's not super cost effective. So like right from the jump, like just identifying PII is like the perfect kind of problem that data science and AI is solving. And then even when you get into it, like connecting like, hey, is this Alice McNeil? Is that her social security number? Is that her address? allowing reviewers, once they're looking at data, making those connections happen really fast is definitely an AI problem. And then even like the entity consolidation, if you think about it, like Jody, take your data, as I'm sure appeared, as all of our data has in many incidences that become breaches. I bet when they're identifying your data, they have your name like several different ways. They probably have maiden name, married name. They probably have Jody spelled wrong. They might have a middle name or something. So they might have several different addresses that you've lived at. But if you're a lawyer that is like overseeing this whole process, you're like, yeah, just tell me who are we sending this thing to? I get it. Her data's compromised. What's her last name? What's her address? How do you spell Jody? What are we doing here? And that's another AI problem of just getting down the 10 instances of various spellings and instances of people's name down to who are we sending the letter to in the end. So across the board, it's an endless AI problem.
And I see Justin smirking over here. Maybe they even have our wrong name, because sometimes we're called all different kinds of things. Or a lot of times, especially for you, you're called Daniel. It's your first name.
Or Jason or Tom.
Yeah,
I get Elliott all the time. My name's a D, but people don't know what to do with the D. So they're just like, okay, Elliott. And they just kind of, so I'm positive that my name is just turned up in Elliott, because when name, they just hear like Elliott's all they know what to do with. So they're just like, oh, I'm just rolling with Elliott.
Well, so fill us in a little bit about Canopy and how does it help companies better respond to data breaches? Where does it fit into this puzzle?
Sure. So we're the only company in the world that's end-to-end focused on the data breach response problem. So there's a lot of like adjacent cobbled together, like, oh, this is kind of on the margins of what we do. But what we do is from the time, like, so what happens before us is the incident response process, where some digital forensic or incident response organization, breach or an incident has occurred, and then they'll say, this is the data right here. So maybe it's a file share that is the subject of ransomware. Maybe it's the PST that has been compromised because of a phishing attack. But they'll say, here's the data. It's right here. It's a PST. It's 30 gigs. It's 80 gigs. It's these 3 PSTs, whatever the data is. From then on is where our software comes into the mix. So what people do is they upload the data into our software. So we run a ton of AI models against the data that our clients select. So another thing that's interesting about us is we're on the data breach response side, we're peer channel. So we sell to people like incident response groups, law firms, litigation service providers on the review side, sometimes insurance companies if they're particularly entrepreneurial. But we sell to people who solve the problem. So so all the people around the table are using our software to initially do that data mining. So that's like the first thing that happens in our software is they upload the data, we run all that AI against it, and then they data mine it and just say, okay, we've got this, 80 gig PST. What's the impact here? Is it an incident? Is it a breach? Do we need to review it? Does it need to go any further? Everyone's praying there's no PII in it. Most of the time there is, unfortunately. But enough that it probably is notifiable a lot of the time, more than people think. But yeah, so it enters our software. Like what comes into our software is that like raw data, like usually unstructured data. And what comes out, like a whole bunch of stuff happens that we can go into if you want. And people doing work, our clients doing work in the software. And what comes out is a CSV that is like a list of names and addresses of the people that are going to be notified. So we're kind of input is the data, output is the CSV with names and addresses. What happens in the middle is like the several steps, like the data mining step, the review step, and then the entity consolidation step, all is happening inside of our software.
It makes sense. And a very needed piece of the puzzle, for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you see companies paying for breach response, or how is it going to evolve? Because premiums have gone through the roof.
Yep.
And coverage is now starting to be significantly curtailed.
Yep. So in a way, and this is kind of a really quirky place that we play in, the biggest beneficiaries, like the two biggest beneficiaries of our software is, number one, insurance companies, but they're usually not our direct client. But what we do, if you think about it, so like let me like thin slice that a little. If you think about it, the reason why there's two main costs that are happening that make these incidences so expensive. One is usually paying the ransom if there's a ransomware. Like that's thing number one that makes it expensive. And thing number two is human beings reviewing data. So like that is actually extremely expensive. And in a really easy shorthand is like $1 a document. So if you have 50 gigs in a PST, which is like real standard. That is not a crazy PST size. Like we're talking several 100,000 documents, maybe even 1 million in just a 50 gig PST, depending. Like a lot of, you can see anywhere between 5,000 docs per gigabyte up to like 12, 13, 14,000 docs per gigabyte. So even 50 gigs, like the math of that gets crazy fast. So the difference between reviewing 15% of that collection and reviewing 70 to 100% of that collection is enormous. And the folks who are on the hook for that, ideally, or not ideally, but like usually are the cyber insurers. So how they pay for it usually is a cyber insurance company. Like they have a cyber breach plan, but you're right. These because of the combo platter of holy cow, this is expensive to review, and these ransoms often are going to get paid and they're expensive as well. You put those two together and people are maxing their policy like every single time. And what we're trying to do is essentially reduce at least that review cost. And what insurance companies are realizing, because up until now, everything was the same until Canopy came along, the entire solution for data mining was search terms and regular expressions, and there wasn't really AI involved. It was just search terms and regular expressions. And for that, you're going to get either 70 to 100%. And so there's a whole ecosystem of like really transparently of review companies that have built their whole business around the review 70% to 100% of the collection. And it was like incredibly lucrative. Like it is a heck of a business to do that. But Canopy comes along and says, what if you only reviewed 15% of that? And for an insurance company, that's fantastic. Once they like wrap their mind around, hey, if you like save money at like the data mining phase controls that review phase. So like save the money at data mining and then review fewer documents. But there's all these review companies that are like killing it on 70 to reviewing dollar a document, 70 to 100%. They're it's pretty lucrative for them. So they're going to fight back hard on that and try and keep a technology like ours out of the game. So what we're doing, so that's thing number one, is saving the cyber insurers money. And thing number two is companies. Because if you think about it, what we're ultimately trying to do is make the cost of doing business less crazy here, so we can all get cyber insurance. So it doesn't exclude the cyber insurance market. So it becomes, in a way, because if you think about it, hackers have created a tax on business via all these cyber insurance policies that we all have to have now. That's really what it is. And Canopy's ultimate end game here is to reduce that tax as much as possible to mitigate that. And the data breach response is the reactive side of that. And then we also have like a proactive looking thing on the proactive side to help people mitigate it as well. But essentially that's how they pay for it via insurance. Insurance premiums go up. Insurance companies are like, oh boy, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And we're trying to change the dynamic there.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So one thing I wanted to talk about specifically in your role as Chief Revenue Officer is talk a little bit about how the sales process works and aligning your software with educating the customer about the data your tool might collect and company and privacy security policies around that data. I find too often in the sales process, this is omitted. And then when the lawyer, get the contract and it's one-sided, it results in either deals being delayed or they don't close.
Yeah, it's quirky for us. I mean, one, we obviously take security extremely seriously. We operate worldwide. We're in like North America, Europe, Australia. So our software is used all over the world. And the security questions and questionnaires and all that stuff is like a standard operating procedure for us and usually gets handled before any specific project. So usually we're working with like the law firm or the digital forensic incident response folks to like vet, like they make sure, yep, your security bona fides make sense. But the quirkiness of the whole situation is that one, the data is not going to live in our software for very long. The only reason it's in there is to get the folks notified as fast as possible. And two, it's breached data. Like this isn't like corporate data that in the traditional sense. This is or it's data that has been compromised. Let's not say breached because that's a legal definition. But essentially, like I said, we take it super seriously. But the endeavor is for the data to be in our software for frankly as short as possible. We don't want the data in our software long because the faster the data comes in, it's data mined. Like they reduce that data set, then they review it. Then they consolidate the entities, they get the list of human beings that need addresses, and then they just delete it from our system and it's gone, never to be heard from again. and it's wiped, and then all they have is a CSV with a list of names and addresses, and that's the output. And some metadata of like what's in the, like how many social security numbers, how many addresses, or if it's like in the UK or something, like how many NHS numbers or something. But the actual PII goes away, the data goes away, etc.
You had shared before a little bit about how you also have some mitigation measures. I imagine a company goes through this whole process. They learn how messy all their data is. Oh
Yep.
my gosh, look at how much personal information we have. So kind of to the conversation that we just had and what Justin was talking about, how do you educate companies on, hopefully you don't have one of these breaches again and we meet. But if you do, you might want to take these kinds of steps to have a smaller pool, have cleaner data. I'd love to hear a little bit more about those mitigation and proactive measures.
Sure. So this is kind of a funny story because like our clients and shout out Gartner a little bit. Like Gartner helped us invent a whole product because they just explained to us that nobody does this. And then some clients were like, can we pay you for this? But we launched after the data breach response product that on the success of how well it is, how good a job it does at PII identification and data mining. We had some clients that like a company would use us in the data breach response process. And then their like CIO or chief privacy officer, somebody would hear about our software from data breach response. And they'd say, well, what if we use something like that before the data breach occurs just to see what we have? And essentially here's our kind of take on that is a lot of the market is all about remediation. And what Privacy Audit, our product, is about is about changing human behavior. So it says, like, we know from data breach that almost every time these compromises occur, what the company finds once they run it through our software is that the folks were out of compliance with policies. Now, they were clicking through all the surveys. They had done the tabletop exercises. They had the right incident response, digital forensics folks in-house. They were taking all the right steps. And yet, the HR team, the marketing team, the sales team, whoever it was, they still had a ton of PII that nobody knew about. And there's just no vector in to find out. So what Privacy Audit does is take all those algorithms that we've developed across billions of elements of PII identified on the data breach side and said, instead of trying to remediate every bit of PII in your enterprise, because that's a fool's errand. That's literally proposing running a data breach response project on your entire company, which nobody's going to do. Instead, just take a couple samples. Say, let's take 2 random HR people that you think represent the way HR uses data and run it through the software, see what kind of PII is there. And then instead of anecdotes or a tabletop exercise where people are trying to pull out of their heads, what do we think we do today? It's tangible. Like, hey, if we had a breach today, or if we had an incident or a compromise, or somebody got phished from this department, you can like drop the report on the table and say, here's what we'd have. Now we understand that you have a job to do and that you didn't realize you were exporting this Excel spreadsheet out of this tool over here, emailing it to this other person, and then they would manipulate it and they'd drop it in a file share. But not, like, we didn't know that was happening. You didn't think about that was happening. You didn't think about once it's in your email, technically now it's in your email. But like, what do we need to do here to not from a like this specific spreadsheet, but from a workflow, from a behavior. Like, it allows training and policies to be updated to be specific to the people that you're talking to with the line of business, and it allows benchmarking. So you really know if people are in compliance or not. So that's what the product is. And that's the way we think about it. So it's like I said, it's about changing human behavior and changing policies and training, not so much about, hey, let's crawl your whole enterprise and look at every bit and byte. Like that seems I don't know, that dog never hunted for me in conceptually, because that was always a pitch to do data breach response on an entire company. And we know from actually doing data breach response that there's no way, because you can barely get a cyber insurance company sometimes to pay for data breach response on just this data right here, let alone the whole company.
It makes sense. Thank you for sharing. And sure. I like the idea of the proactive piece, because there's data hiding in a variety of different nooks and crannies inside companies.
And it's where, like, and it's not even, I guess I'd say this, it's only hiding because no one has a way to look at it. Like, it's not really, it's just sitting there in PSTs and file shares. It's hiding in plain sight. It's just that there's no vector into it. There's like nothing that like says, here it is. Here's here's 30,000 social security numbers just sitting in someone's PST. There's nothing that says that.
Right. Hopefully they won't keep having 30,000 social security numbers hiding in someone's PST.
You'd hope not, but
I would hope not.
Yeah.
But I know it happens in some companies.
More than we like to think about.
Indeed.
Well, kind of changing the game a little bit is, in your experience, would you like to share what is your favorite privacy or security tip with our audience?
Oh, absolutely. This is something that most people like. It's wild to me that most people don't know about. So the caveat here is that this is, if you live in Apple world, this is going to apply. So if you have like an iPhone, and it really super duper applies if you're using a Mac. So one of the most like, I would say unheralded, because they don't get a ton of the advertising, but the team working on authentication and passwords inside of Apple is killing it. And the person who manages that team, Ricky Mondello, shout out Ricky Mondello, is like phenomenal and doing like amazing. That whole team is crushing it. But they now have multi-factor authentication built straight in to pretty much the OS level of Apple devices. So if you think about, previously I'd been using like Google Authenticator in my personal life to use multi-factor. And the thing about that's annoying about that Authenticator app is like, if you have it on your phone, one, you have to copy the codes across. And two, if you get a new phone, you have to like do this dance of transferring your multi-factor from one phone to the next phone. It's like super frustrating. So now the Apple solution is like so good. It's built straight into the autofill password. And if you go into like settings and passwords and then go into any specific site, so like say, just take Twitter. If you go in, if you want to set up multi-factor via Apple on Twitter, you can just go into the password section of your Apple device, and you can do it on, if you're on the latest and greatest of their software, either the passwords thing, and you go into the website in question, and then you can set up code or whatever it is, but it allows you to do it either via QR code, you scan it, and now it works across all your devices. So literally, when you get a new iPhone or iPad, your multi-factor is ready to go. It's just right there, and it autofills. So when you get the multi-factor dialog, like it'll autofill it from the keychain. And like this is like the way normal people can implement multi-factor, because I think multi-factor is really hard to understand stuff for your average person. And this is the way, if any civilian, I don't know what we call like people who don't live in privacy and security space, but any regular person who doesn't
normal people,
normal people, I would say this is the route. And even if you're like one of us, I would still say the implementation is phenomenal. Phenomenal implementation of multi-factor. Highly recommend if you live in Apple world, if you have an iPhone, if you have a Mac, this is my recommended. Like it's just so easy and so user friendly.
I'm just curious, if you have a, let's say, PC computer, Windows-based computer and iPhone, does it still work, or does it get messed up if you want to be on Twitter on the PC and Twitter on your phone?
No, it still works fine, because you'll just get the code. The code is always there in that passwords location on your phone. So you'd still just be able to like look at the code and like type in the 6-digit code or whatever. It's still right there, but it's still amazing, because if you think about it, when you get a new iPhone, which we every 2 years or so, a lot of us do, it just transfers. There's no dance of there's no multi-factor dance. And if it really, when it's the worst, is if you use your current phone as like the upgrade phone and trade it in, then you're really toast if you don't think about it ahead of time, because you're like you can be in multi-factor purgatory. This solves like all of that. All of it solved. It's right there. And considering Apple's like the privacy company, it floors me. I don't get that they don't talk about this more.
Well, we will do our best to highlight that tip for everyone, maybe even give a little shout out to Ricky. So thank you. Now, when you're not giving out awesome tips and being the privacy professional that you are, what do you like to do for fun?
So one, hiking. The company Canopy, we're named that way because like our CEO, one of his favorite things is like hiking with his wife, and it like coincidentally, a lot of us at the company, that's my favorite thing in the world too, is hiking with my wife. So like hiking in the Pacific Northwest or wherever there's a beautiful nature. Like love hiking, love watching NBA basketball, and so that's like thing number 2. And thing number 3, somehow thanks to my kids, is like Pokemon Go. It's just become like the background noise of my life somehow is Pokemon Go.
I didn't know if that was still around, because I remember years ago it was a thing. Shopping centers had to have blockades, and then I don't hear about it anymore.
It's still a thing, and it's like it's the game itself is like not like there. Yeah, I somehow don't even get how I got sucked into this world, but I did, and so now I kind of play Pokemon Go like on some sort of basis. And my oldest kid, who like is the one who got me into it, like laughs at the fact that like I play more than he does at this point. Like I like so, but it's still there, and it's kind of the jumping off point that Niantic, the company behind all those technologies, it's like their flagship product still, and they're still chasing like the next thing to do with their like geolocation, AR, all the technologies behind Pokemon Go. They're like always trying to like launch new products. I'm always seeing what else they do with it. But Pokemon Go was like the perfect mix of intellectual property and technology. But it's a great game, and it's really interesting, and it gets you going around every city you go to.
Have you purchased your first NBA NFT yet?
Not so. I have not. And I'm kind of takey. I guess I'm takey on the NFT thing. I get it. I get why people like it. I collected basketball cards as a kid, and they're like digital basketball cards. I'm of the belief that I would probably buy the one that would immediately go down in value, and like mine wouldn't be worth a lot, and I'd just be like, nah, I'll just like go to games and watch on League Pass and enjoy it that way. But it's cool. I love that they're doing it. And it's like one of my favorite implementations of blockchain technology.
One of Justin's other favorite pastimes. Well, Adi, it's been so much fun. If people want to connect with you and or learn more about Canopy, where should they go?
Canopyco.io. That's the, so canopyco.io is our website. All the information's there. And that's the easiest way to find all of us online.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. We really enjoyed the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.